very much, Chair, and good morning, members. I apologise for mucking up your schedule. I was, in my defence, doing a radio interview with the BBC out in reception there about this very event, and just as we got to the question about, can you tell me how important connectivity is to the... You're a step ahead of me, but let me just give you the punchline. Can you tell me how important connectivity is to SMEs in Northern Ireland? The line went dead. So, anyway, you missed out there if you want a bit of comedy later on. Just to give you a quick introduction to OFCOM, you can see on the screen all the various bits and pieces of the communications sectors that we regulate. What I'm going to talk about today is basically the deployment of the infrastructure. It's fair to say that, as we've seen from the case studies and from David's presentation and Emma's presentation, communication services are absolutely critical, not just to UK business, but to society. Whether you're trying to set up a business online or whether you're trying to help your kids with their homework, it is absolutely essential. The latest research we have shows that on average, a UK adult uses communication services for approximately half their waking hours every day. And we rely, BBC aside, we rely on coverage capacity and really just robust communications networks to help us use all these new devices. Ofcom's job is basically to try and set a regulatory framework, because all this investment in networks is basically led by private companies. These are not utilities. People believe they're utilities when we talk about things like broadband and mobile, but they're not. They're being ruled out by private companies. And the economics of that, of course, means that they're not always going to get to absolutely everything. You're not going to have ubiquitous coverage for broadband or mobile. So where there are gaps, there's an opportunity for public investment. So our job is to basically set the framework so that private investors know what return on investment they're going to get. And where there are gaps, then there's an opportunity for perhaps Ofcom, perhaps the government, to intervene and to make sure that those services are pushed out further for the benefit of citizens and consumers. There are some levers that we can pull as the regulator. For example, we can set coverage targets for mobile companies, or the government might want to intervene as it's done for broadband, both nationally and here in Northern Ireland. But you've got to make sure that that intervention is really targeted and that you're aiming at the right places, otherwise you're going to deter further investment. So one of the things we've got to do as a regulator is make sure that we know the market really well, and we publish lots of research reports, both UK-wide and on Northern Ireland specifically. They're all available on our website. I would encourage you particularly to read the Communications Market Report for Northern Ireland. So I'm going to look at two things in the next 10 minutes. Firstly, I'm going to look at the improvements in our broadband and mobile coverage, and there is an awful lot happening. But I'm going to look first at the challenges we face that are very specific to Northern Ireland. This is a map of what you might call light pollution across the UK, and effectively where there are lights, there are people. Now, hopefully you can see, even at the back from this slide, that when you look at Northern Ireland, compared to Wales, compared to Scotland, compared to England, we are more evenly spread out across the countryside. If you look at Scotland, you've got the central belt. If you look at Wales, you've got the south coast, and you can obviously see London, Birmingham, Liverpool and Manchester. But when it comes to Northern Ireland, we're more evenly spread out. We're not neatly packed into towns and villages. And that actually affects every aspect of the infrastructure I'm talking about today. It means that your phone line is more likely to be longer, therefore your broadband is more likely to be slower. It means that it's more difficult to find a location to build a mobile phone mast that's not in someone's backyard. When it comes to Royal Mail, something else that we regulate, it takes your postman longer to do his route in a rural area. And when it comes to TV transmitters, this is a really good illustration, I think, of sort of diminishing returns you get when you try to roll out infrastructure. This chart, I'll explain what it is. Along the horizontal axis, you've got all the TV transmitters that currently operate across the UK to give us Freeview. So there's some 1,100 of them. And you've got the UK population going up on the vertical axis. You only need 80 TV transmitters to reach 90% of the UK population. Now, to get to the last 8.5%, you need another 1,000 TV transmitters. And worth noting, TV that we all grew up watching only ever reached 98.5% of the population. There is no such thing as 100% coverage. Having said all that, it is, you might think, rather amazing what I'm about to tell you in terms of the broadband improvements that we've actually seen in Northern Ireland. And it's been led very much by DETI, with assistance from DAR, the European funding, and in association with BT. And effectively what they've been doing is, as David has already highlighted, they have been rolling out fibre to the premises. So they've been replacing existing street cabinets with fibre cabinets, pushing fibre further out from the exchange to the streets. The challenge is that you've still got this copper connection from the street cabinet to your premises, whether it's a house or a business, and that is the perennial problem that we're now trying to resolve. So when you take BT's network, now BT estimates that about 90% of phone lines in Northern Ireland are now connected to one of those fibred street cabinets. And when you add in Virgin Media's fibre network on top of that, and a couple of other fibre networks as well in Northern Ireland, it means that about 94% of premises in Northern Ireland are connected to a next generation network. Now, does that mean, and you can see how far ahead we are in terms of the rest of the UK, and on the map, the darker the colour, the better your network speed potentially. I say potentially because it doesn't mean that those 94% of premises are all getting super fast broadband. We estimate that in Northern Ireland about 77% of that 94 are getting super fast broadband, and we define that as being 30 megs or above. And if you compare the figures, you'll see that actually the gap for the whole of the UK is quite small. So they've only got 78% of premises in next gen and 75% getting super fast. But our gap is bigger, and it's bigger for the reasons I explained earlier, because we are all spread out more evenly. We're not packed neatly together where it's easier to give good connectivity. Lots of other developments happening in broadband. I'll touch first on some public intervention. Super connected cities, I'm sure most of you will be aware of this. It's based primarily around a voucher scheme that's being run in 22 cities across the UK at the moment. It's funded by Broadband Delivery UK, which is part of Department of Culture, Media and Sport. Belfast and Derry are both part of this scheme, as well as the voucher scheme, where SMEs can apply for grants of up to £3,000. There's also public Wi-Fi initiatives now. In Belfast, there have been over 700 SMEs have taken advantage of this scheme. Total vouchers, I think, is coming to about 1.4 million so far. In Derry, there's about 180 SMEs have taken advantage of this scheme. In Belfast as well, we're going to see public Wi-Fi available to about 100 buildings, public buildings, I believe, within the next couple of months. People say, actually, well, why are you aiming at cities? Surely cities should have good broadband coverage because they are cities. Actually, one of the worst connected parts of the UK is actually the city of London, because they have no street cabinets at all, because they were all removed as part of security measures during the Troubles. Another government intervention is part of Superfast Britain, which is one of the super connected cities as part of this project. And this particular pilot study, which is being run by Avanti, which is a satellite broadband provider, is focusing on rural locations and trying to reach those parts of the country that can't easily be reached by traditional phone line networks. They've picked out trial areas in Scotland and Northern Ireland. And again, it's just about providing pilot studies and a different way of getting connectivity out into rural areas. DETI is far from finished from its work, as well as the £50 million project I talked about a few minutes ago. They're in the middle of an additional £23 million project aimed really at lifting people out of the sort of less than 2 megabits area, and I think they've got about 45,000 premises identified across Northern Ireland. They're putting more street cabinets in. BT has a whole bag of tools that it's trying to use to try and squeeze all the speed that they can out of the existing network. And you might have spotted Minister Foster a couple of days ago announced an additional £17 million, again in association with BT, and as far as I'm aware, that is to focus more on the superfast end of the network. And it would be remiss not to mention, obviously, the market investments that are being made continually. OFCOM announced last week, I think it was, I see Darren somewhere in the room, an additional 13 cities, towns and cities being added to their IP network. Blue Box Broadband provide fixed wireless, mainly from the northwest, but heading southeast in Northern Ireland. They're based up in Derry, and they provide fixed wireless, which is a bit like a mobile network. So you have a transmitter site, and then on your premises you would have a small reception dish that would give you a radio connection to give you a broadband. And iBub is another local provider which is using satellite to provide services at retail level. So, and these are, I'm talking mainly about sort of infrastructure developments, by the way, not reselling. So that's fixed line. Let me talk just to finish about mobile. There are a lot of moving parts in the mobile industry at the moment. I'm going to pick out just 3 of them. They're all about improving coverage. The first one is the Mobile Infrastructure Project. This is a UK-wide project. It's a public intervention by government. £150 million identified to build brand new mobile phone masts in areas where there is absolutely no coverage whatsoever. There are about 70 sites identified for Northern Ireland, and you can see not the exact locations, but hopefully you can pick up a bit of a pattern in that most of them are sort of west of the Ban and close to the border areas. And that's no big surprise because that's where all the gaps are, funnily enough. So the idea is to build a single mast in an area where there's no coverage. All the mobile operators have signed up to put all their kit on these masts, and you will go from potentially being in an area where there's no mobile coverage to having one mast that is providing 4 operators, and not just 2G but 3G, and in an ideal world 4G off the one transmitter site. This is a unique and time limited offer. The funding runs out in March 2016. We are currently working alongside the civil servants and the company called Arqiva, who own the transmission infrastructure for the BBC. It's their job to go out and try and build these sites. We're trying to get alongside them to persuade communities that this is a really good opportunity, and local government as well, to make sure that people understand if they don't take this opportunity, the masts are going to get built somewhere else and they're going to really miss out. The mobile operators themselves reached an agreement with the government after lengthy negotiations last year. There was a possibility that there was going to be national roaming, which the government wanted to address, not just complete not spots, talked about, but partial not spots. So where you maybe have 1 operator but not 2, certainly not 3 and definitely not 4. So the government agreed with the operators that the operators would spend between themselves £5 billion increasing their voice coverage to 90% of the landmass of the UK, not by premises, but to the landmass of the UK, and they'll do that by the end of 2017. And that has got real significance for Northern Ireland because we've traditionally lagged behind in terms of partial not spots. Effectively, at the moment, you're going to have really 2 networks because O2 and Vodafone already have a joint venture where they are sharing radio equipment on masts. And similarly, EE and 3 are working together in a joint venture to roll out their mobile broadband. I'm not talking about the mergers and acquisitions that have been in the press in the last few weeks. I mean, this has already happened. So you'll still have competition on the high street. You'll still have all 5 operators plus all the 4 operators plus the virtual networks you can buy, like Tesco's and Virgin Mobile. But behind the scenes, when it comes to the plumbing, increasingly there's greater consolidation. Finally, 4G. David mentioned this earlier on. OFCOM was responsible for auctioning off these licenses about 1.5 years ago. 4G is really about giving as it turns out, the mobile operators additional capacity and the ability to offer you greater speeds and greater bandwidth and to cope with more people using smartphones effectively. So we issued these licenses by auction in 2013, and for the very first time we set a coverage obligation, not just for the UK, but for individual nations. So as the companies roll out 4G, one of the licenses has an obligation that you must provide indoor coverage of 4G to 95% of premises in Northern Ireland. This is the first time anyone has tried doing this as a regulator. They've got to do that by the end of 2017. We did that because the license could have gone to a new entrant, so they needed time to build their network. O2 has got the license for that for Northern Ireland. I mentioned that they have a joint venture with Vodafone, so Vodafone, if that continues, will have the same footprint of coverage. And I don't for a second think that EE and 3 are going to give them a free run. In fact, EE has got the best 4G coverage in Northern Ireland by some distance at the moment. To finish, I suppose I could say if you've been affected by any of the issues raised in this presentation, you can find out more about specific coverage information for your area by postcode. We have a number of Google Map driven functions on our website. Please visit, have a look, put in your postcode. You'll find everything from digital TV to digital radio to the mobile and broadband stuff I've been talking about. I would also encourage you to have a look at the Superfast broadband website for Northern Ireland, nibroadband.com. Again, gives you an opportunity to put in your postcode and see if your area is already part of the improved rollout or if it is going to be part of the improvements that I've talked about. Thank you very much for your time. Sorry to mess up your schedule, and happy to take questions.